The Federal Reserve and the United States are under attack. Now, the U.S. power-led order has been in place officially since 1944, and the U.S. dollar's reserve currency status has allowed massive prosperity for the United States and the expansion of the largest military in the history of the world. But the world's breaking apart. The U.S. power-led order is under attack, and even the U.S. dollar is under attack. And while it's been the U.S. that's been weaponizing the dollar against the rest of the world, it now looks like the world is ganging up on the U.S. as inflicting financial warfare against the Federal Reserve and the United States. So in this video, I'm going to break down a massive advancement in the financial warfare against the Fed as they fight against inflation and the U.S. homogeneity. We're going to look at what just happened that severely limits what the U.S. and the Fed can do globally and financially, what this means for you, for your retirements, for your savings, for your portfolios, what to watch, and so much more. So let's go. All right, welcome back. If you're new to the channel, my name is Mark Moss. Of course, I make these videos to change the way you think about money because, man, it's difficult. It's difficult to understand. These matters are so complex and they're so interwoven. And so I like to break them down so you can easily understand them and take action against them. We can be right directionally. All right, so let's go back through this. I do just want to say real quick, I'm throwing it out, I'm giving you a discount if you want to join me in Miami for the Bitcoin conference. I'm going to be speaking there, and they've given me a discount code for you if you want to come join me. We're going to put a link down below. There's also a QR code on the screen that you can see, or a link in the description. Get a discount if you want to come. If you send me back send me an email showing that you've bought a ticket with my discount code, and I'm going to organize a special meetup for everybody that's there. So check it out if you want to come. Otherwise, let's go ahead and jump into this. So to really understand the depth of this, to understand how big this is, you have to understand a little bit of history, and you know that's my favorite part, is to jump back. So let's go back. I'm going to run you back just real quick. We're going to go back about 100 years ago. 100 years ago. We're going to come back to this. It's an important piece of this. But the UK, England, was the superpower of the world. Their reserve currency, the pound sterling, was the reserve currency of the world. They engaged into World War I, severely weakened their currency, into World War II, severely weakened their currency. And through that process of about 20 years, 30 years, the U.S. took over the power. Most of the gold flowed back to the United States. And officially in 1944, under what's called the Bretton Woods Agreement, the dollar was declared the reserve currency of the world. The dollar would be backed by gold. All the currencies of the world would be backed or pegged to the dollar. All right, 100 years ago, 1944. Remember those days. Now, 1944 onward, the dollar was backed by gold. I'm not going to go back through all this, but basically in 1971, under President Richard Nixon, the U.S. defaulted. Hey, we told the nations of the world, use our dollars. Anytime you want, you can redeem $35 for 1 ounce of gold. And we gave so much gold up, the United States gave so much gold up that they said no more. We defaulted. You could no longer redeem it for gold. And Richard Nixon closed the gold window. But how did the U.S. maintain its global hegemonic power over both power over military as well as monetary power without having the gold backing, which is what gave them the power in the first place? Well, they went and organized a new deal. In 1974, the petrodollar was born. They basically went to Saudi Arabia and said, hey, here's the deal. You make sure that you always sell oil, energy, priced in dollars, and we'll make sure to always protect you. We got your back. So that was born, and so that now you understand this deep relationship with Saudi Arabia and the United States. You know that when the Twin Towers fell, you remember George Bush secretly sneaking the Saudi family out of the country, even though flights were restricted. Now you start to understand why that's happened. We've had that agreement. But since that time, the United States has enjoyed massive benefits of having the reserve currency status. Basically, the United States can print unlimited amounts of money, and it can ship that money to the rest of the world. Now, the rest of the world, so the U.S. it spends about 17 cents to produce a $100 bill. But the rest of the world has to come up with $100 worth of goods or services to get that same bill the U.S. spent 17 cents for. That's what we call the Cantillon effect. That's what we call the benefit of having seigniorage. And so the United States has been able to print unlimited amounts of money, been able to import all those goods and services from around the world with money they printed, and has been able to ship or export that inflation all over the world, ravaging countries. That's why you see sky-high inflation in all these other countries. But more than that, what the U.S. dollar has done, or the U.S. has done with the dollar, is by weaponizing it against other countries. Sanctions. You do something we don't like, something that goes against the rule of order that we impose, then sanctions on you and sanctions on you, and we're going to take money from you. We're going to restrict your trade. We're going to kick you out of the financial system. If you're Iran, if you're Russia, we're going to seize your FX reserves, and we've weaponized it. The problem is people don't like that. People don't like to be hit on the head. People don't like to be hit with a stick, and it's like having a party. Eventually, I've kicked so many people out of the party that they went and started their own party. And so we saw really efforts started ramping up about 2013 when China announced that they were going to start de-dollarizing. So China and Russia both started to de-dollarize. And as part of the de-dollarization, they were just buying less. They were buying less dollars, less treasuries. But also what they did is they set up their own trade cooperations known as the BRICS. We'll come back to that in a minute. But they basically set up a very anti-American stance, waging economic warfare against the dollar and the U.S.'s rule of order. Now, there's rumors, and I'm working on it, we'll come back to it, but potentially even China could be behind some of the problems that we're seeing in the banking sector in the United States right now. If you want me to dig into that and put a video together, let me know in the comments down below. But going back to the petrodollar for a minute, the dollar has been protected by the currency. The problem is that we have right now is that energy went really high. Oil went high, gas price went high, and that caused inflation to go up. Now, in the U.S., the Biden administration said it's because of Russia. They're the ones behind that. It doesn't really matter. It's that oil and energy are the main drivers of inflation. When energy goes up, everything goes up because everything requires energy. Now, to combat that, good old President Biden had this bright idea to just drain our strategic petroleum reserves, SPRs. Now, those reserves are meant for times when we really, really need them. Like, let's say, for example, we go into a world war and nobody will ship us oil, then we have some reserves. That's why you have savings. However, it wasn't meant to be used in a time when there is no emergency, but of course, that's what we did. We drained the oil reserves. On top of that, Biden went around the world begging Saudi Arabia for more oil. The problem is our partners since 1974, Saudi Arabia, that we've depended on to maintain the homogeneity of the U.S. dollar, Biden ran on a campaign to put them in their place. He criticized them. He said he was going to put them in their place, and so they didn't like that, turns out. And when he begged them to put more oil, he begged them to have a meeting with him, they didn't even want him to come. As a matter of fact, you can see pictures on the internet where the Crown Prince of Saudi didn't even want to shake Biden's hand, and they gave each other a fist bump instead. And I think that says all that you need to know. Now, going back to this anti-American warfare alliance, the BRICS. The BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South America. Now, there's lots of talks about the BRICS lately. You've probably been hearing and seeing all about it everywhere. They're trading outside the U.S. dollar. They're trading using the yuan. They're going to create a new reserve currency. There's truth to that. They're not going to replace the dollar anytime soon. However, they are going to cause a serious problem. They actually did. That's what we're talking about right now. So the BRICS were created to counter what's known as the G7, the top 7 countries in the world, which is the U.S., the U.K., Germany, France, Italy, Japan, and Canada. Now, the BRICS basically set up a counter to what's known as the IMF and the World Bank. And they did that with a new development bank. Now, this is a key piece because the IMF was set up in 1944 under the Bretton Woods Agreement. So now the BRICS are countering the G7 and countering what the IMF and World Bank is doing. And the BRICS economic growth has been outstanding. They have been growing at a rapid rate, and now they're all engaging in trade outside of the dollar. They're trading in their own local currencies, and they're mainly trading in the Chinese yuan. Now, more and more countries are wanting to join the BRICS. As a matter of fact, 16 countries now this year in 2023 say they want to join the BRICS. The reason why is it turns out most countries don't like to be threatened. Most countries don't like to be hit with sticks. Most countries don't want to be sanctioned and have the dollar weaponized against them. And now it looks like the BRICS nations are now ganging up against the United States. So you already know that Russia's been under sanctions, of course, because of the Russia-Ukraine situation. And so the U.S. and the West have sanctioned Russia, meaning seizing their bank accounts, no more trade, and even trying to put a cap on what Russia is allowed to sell their oil for. Now, of course, since we've kicked them out of the party, what control does the U.S. have over them? Well, not much, as you might imagine. And so the BRICS nations don't really care. The BRICS nations don't really care about the sanctions. And as a matter of fact, President Xi of China was just over in Russia. And this is where things start to get interesting now that you understand the historical parallel. So in a meeting they talked about how they're going to redraw the world, how they're going to reimagine global trade, how they're going to become partners. And of course, Russia, which is the largest commodity exporter in the world, raw materials. China, which is the largest manufacturer in the world, which needs the commodities, are perfect partners. If the U.S. goes through and defeats Russia, as they hope to, what happens with China? Now, China's left all alone. Who's going to give them the commodities? So you might imagine it might be in China's best interest to make sure Russia doesn't go down. And that appears what happens. As a matter of fact, let me play this little video clip, and you can hear directly a conversation from Xi and Putin directly. Let's play that clip.
Это как раз сейчас перемены, которые не было в течение 100 лет. Там, где вместе двигаем эти перемены. Перекиньте, пожалуйста, дорогой друг.
All right, so there you had it. Notice what they said. We're going to effect change that hasn't been done in 100 years. What was the change? Well, 100 years ago, the superpower of the world was waging war and destroyed their currency. After they waged war and destroyed their currency, they lost the reserve currency status of the world, and England is no longer a superpower of the world. Now, they're still around, and the pound sterling is still around. It's the third most used currency in the world. But they've lost their status. Now, what are they talking about? We're going to effect change that hasn't been done in 100 years. I don't know exactly. They didn't say exactly. But we do know the change that happened 100 years ago. And now we have a sign of what that might possibly be. So what am I talking about? Like I said, all these BRICS nations are now trading outside the dollar. They're trading in oil in yuan. Now, I know there's a lot of people say that there won't be another reserve currency, and I would agree with that. Not right now. But what we're witnessing is the decline of the dollar as a reserve currency status, which are used in the bonds. If you want me to break this whole thing down and how reserve currency works and why you need to operate in a financial system, let me know in the comments down below. I can do a whole video on that. But basically, I'm not saying that the yuan will be the new reserve currency where nations will pile into their bonds, but it is being used as a currency, as a medium of exchange. But more importantly, the battle has now been brought to the United States. It is now the BRICS nations ganging up on the Fed. So what am I talking about? So we have the Federal Reserve. They have printed way too much money and created massive inflation. I've gone over this many times. You know that. Just search my channel. I have lots of that. And so now the Fed is determined to beat inflation by crushing demand. So the goal is to crush demand, make everybody poor so they don't buy as much. They don't order as much stuff online. They don't drive as much. They don't go out to dinner as much. And that will reduce the amount of energy that is purchased. So remember, all prices are the equilibrium of supply and demand. So if the Fed can crush demand and supply stays the same, prices come down. The problem is when you're the OPEC cartel, so this is the nation, a group of nations that have joined together to produce the oil. Well, they don't want the price of their oil to come down. So if the Fed is trying to fight inflation by bringing down demand, OPEC says, okay, fine, then we'll just bring down the supply of oil. We'll keep the equilibrium there. As a matter of fact, that's exactly what happened. 9 members of OPEC just announced a very surprised and voluntary collective output cut totaling 1.6 million barrels per day. That's going to take effect from May of this year until the end of 2023. So the Fed's trying to do all they can to save the United States, to bring inflation down, crushing demand, and OPEC says, fine, then we'll just lower our output. And that's exactly what's happened. And so what just happened is that the Fed just learned they have no control. So the Fed has one tool. They can crush demand. Energy being the main driver isn't controlled by the Fed. It's controlled by OPEC. And so they can just lower supply, and the Fed can lower demand, and they can lower supply all they want. And we've realized that the dollar, what's happening with the dollar, what's happening with inflation is outside of the Fed's control. The Fed doesn't have the power to do this. Now, the Fed could, or in the United States, we could be energy independent. We could allow our energy producers to produce the oil that we need, of course, but the Biden administration has worked really hard to shut them down. A bigger problem is that even if the Biden administration were to change face, which isn't going to happen, but even if they were and said, hey, oil producers, go ahead, turn your oil supply rigs back on, let's get that oil out of the ground, well, they can't, because the Fed, in trying to kill inflation, has brought rates high. And now the cost of capital is too expensive for the energy producers to produce the oil. So the Fed has really put themselves into a serious predicament at this point. And it looks like it's a coordinated attack against the Fed and potentially the entire monetary system. That's what President Xi and Putin were talking about, effect change that hasn't happened in 100 years. Now, what should we expect from this? What's going to happen? Well, one, expect more inflation. Remember, the Fed is trying to crush inflation by crushing demand. But the problem is, as they're crushing demand to bring oil prices down, energy prices down, OPEC is just going to lower the supply. So expect more inflation. This is going to feed inflation globally. And what is that going to do? Well, that's going to put stocks, that's going to put equities under massive pressure. We expect more risk. We're going to expect more risk because as inflation is not over, the Fed will continue to try to increase rates. And that's going to continue to sink earnings. That's going to continue to sink the stock prices. Now, what are we going to do about it? I'm going to continue doing what I've been doing, which is running a barbell approach. So it looks like we're going to have more inflation ahead, but at the same time, things are very risky. So a barbell strategy allows me to play both sides. I'm heavy cash and cash-like equivalents. I've been talking about this quite a bit. That would be short-dated treasuries, money market funds, etc. On the other side, gold, gold miners, and Bitcoin over there. So I'm ready for inflationary, but I'm also offsetting my risk with the cash and cash equivalents over there. If you want to know more about investing into gold and gold miners and resource miners and commodities and things like that, I put together a free report. You can get it for free. You can download it. There's a link in the description. We'll put a QR code on the screen right now. It's my gift for free if you want to just learn how to evaluate them and what I look for and kind of my own criteria. The last thing I want to mention is that, again, I'm going to be at the Bitcoin conference. There's a link to a discount if you want to come check it out. That's down there as well. But otherwise, the war over the monetary homogeneity is heating up. And it looks like the BRICS nations have now gone from being defensive, defending themselves against financial warfare, to now being the aggressors. Things are changing really, really fast, and it's going to be interesting, but what do you think? Please leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Of course, as always, give me a thumbs up if you like the video. Give me a thumbs down if you don't. That's okay, but at least tell me why in the comments down below. And that's what I got. All right, to your success. I'm out.